The artificial world of Kelleris had never known true weight. For thousands of cycles, its people had lived inside a perfect pull that never changed, never wavered, never failed. Their gravity core hung at the center of the planet like a silent heart, shaping every street, tower, and ocean into calm balance. Buildings rose in impossible curves. Lakes rested on platforms that floated in the air. Entire cities hung above one another, held in place by invisible force that everyone trusted without question. Until the day the ground felt wrong. It began as a tremor so light that most citizens thought it was imagination. Cups slid a few millimeters across tables. Hanging gardens swayed. Water in open channels formed strange ripples that did not match the air currents. Sensors across the world reported tiny fluctuations in gravitational output, far below danger levels. The engineers dismissed it as noise in the system. Then a district on the lower tier lost gravity for 3 seconds. People and vehicles drifted upward in slow confusion before slamming back down when the pull returned. Glass shattered. Structures twisted. Panic spread faster than official announcements. Emergency broadcasts filled every communication band. The word that no one had spoken in centuries appeared on screens everywhere. Instability. Deep beneath the planet's inner shell, the greatest minds of Kelleris gathered in the core control hall. The chamber was larger than many cities built around the outer housing of the gravity core itself. Rings of light floated in the air, projecting models of stress lines, energy flows, and vibration patterns. The data was impossible to fully understand at a glance, even for them. They had never seen readings like this. The core was perfect. It had been designed to regulate itself, to correct its own imbalances, to predict problems before they could form. Yet the displays showed stress accumulating in places where no stress should exist. Microfractures were appearing in support anchors that had never been touched since the day the planet was built. A senior engineer named Varric ran trembling hands through the light projections. "Increase field stabilization by 6%, he ordered. The system obeyed. The stress lines grew worse. Another engineer tried adjusting the harmonic regulators. A third shut down secondary energy feeds to reduce load. Every action made the readings more unstable. It was as if the core resisted being helped. Far above them, gravity flickered again in 2 more districts. This time it lasted 5 seconds. People began evacuating tall structures. Transport lanes were shut down. Floating habitats were anchored with emergency cables that had not been used in generations. Across the planet, fear replaced confidence. The impossible was happening. The leaders of Kelleris assembled in a secure chamber overlooking the core. They watched the engineers work with growing silence. One of them finally spoke the thought none of them wanted to admit. "We cannot fix this." The words felt heavier than gravity itself. They had mastered energy, space manipulation, and matter shaping. They had built an entire world from nothing. Yet now they were facing a problem that their own knowledge could not solve. One advisor suggested calling allied civilizations for help. Several names were mentioned. Advanced species known for theoretical sciences and quantum engineering. Varric shook his head. "They think like we do. They will follow the same paths we have already tried." Then someone said a name no one expected. Humans. Humans were known across the region, but not for elegant science. They were known for survival in harsh environments, for crude machines that somehow worked, for solving problems with methods that seemed almost primitive. Their technology often looked rough compared to the precision systems of Kelleris. They were not respected for perfection. They were respected for endurance. "It would be an embarrassment," one leader muttered. "It would be survival," Varric replied. Another tremor passed through the chamber. Lights flickered for a fraction of a second as gravity shifted again. The decision was made. A distress signal was sent through long-range channels marked with the highest urgency level Kelleris had ever issued. Hours later, deep space monitors detected a small human vessel exiting faster than light travel at the edge of the system. Not a fleet, not a scientific delegation. One ship. Inside the core control hall, officials watched the approach with a mixture of hope and confusion. The ship was compact, functional, covered in visible tool mounts and external repair drones. It looked more like a maintenance craft than a rescue vessel. A communication channel opened. A human face appeared on the projection. Calm. Focused. No sign of awe at seeing an artificial world. "This is Elias Ward, field engineer," he said. "Your signal mentioned gravitational failure. Send me the data." They sent everything. He studied it for less than a minute. "I need direct access to the core chamber," he said. No questions. No discussion. No visible concern about the scale of the problem. Permission was granted immediately. The human ship docked with one of the maintenance ports near the planet's interior. Elias stepped out wearing a simple suit with tools attached to his belt. No advanced scanning devices, no escort team. Just one person walking into the most complex machine ever built. Engineers guided him through vast corridors toward the core. Along the way, gravity shifted twice more. He adjusted his footing without comment. When he finally entered the core control hall, he stopped walking. For a long moment, he simply looked. The gravity core dominated the chamber, a sphere of layered structures, rotating rings, and glowing conduits suspended in the center of the space. Energy flowed through it like veins of light. The air vibrated with power. The engineers waited for him to react with amazement. He did not. He tilted his head slightly, studying it the way a mechanic studies a broken engine. Varric approached. "This is the heart of our world. The problem is spreading from the central anchor region. We have tried every known stabilization method." Elias walked closer to the projection of the damage. He did not touch the controls. He did not ask for explanations of the advanced systems. He asked one question: how long since this was physically inspected? The engineers exchanged looks. "Physically?" Varric asked. "Yes. Someone standing next to it, touching it." Silence answered him. Elias exhaled slowly. "Take me down there." They hesitated. No one went near the core housing anymore. Everything was monitored remotely. It had been that way for centuries. Another gravity fluctuation shook the chamber, stronger than before. A distant crash echoed through the structure. Varric signaled for access. As they descended toward the inner levels, Elias remained quiet. He watched the walls, the vibrations under his boots, the faint tremors in the handrails. He placed his palm against surfaces several times, feeling them as if listening through touch. When they reached the maintenance platform near the central anchor, Elias stopped again. He stared at the structure for a long time. Then he said very calmly, "You built this wrong from the beginning." The words echoed louder than the alarms still sounding across the planet. Elias moved closer to the gravity core, examining every curve, every glowing conduit, every spinning ring. The alien engineers stood behind him, their faces tense, expecting some reaction, some awe, some praise for the core's perfection. But Elias did not react that way. He did not smile. He did not comment. He walked slowly, touching a panel here, a rail there, feeling the vibrations, the pulse of the machine. To him it was alive, but not in a way the aliens understood. It was alive like a metal tree swaying in a storm, and it had a weakness. The senior engineer, Varric, tried to explain the design again. Every component is mathematically aligned. Quantum harmonics are in balance. Energy flows perfectly through the conduits. There is no way this core should fail. Elias nodded slightly, but did not speak. Another engineer, a young woman named Lyra, stepped forward. The fracture is spreading faster than predicted. They tried all stabilization routines, all resonance compensators. Nothing stops it. Elias turned to them. "I see why." "You see why?" Varric asked. Elias stepped closer to the main anchor. He reached out and touched the metal surface with one hand. The alien sensor screamed a warning, but the human ignored them. He listened with his palm. "It is too rigid," he said quietly. "You have no flexibility. You built a perfect system that cannot absorb stress. It has no tolerance. When one part shifts, the whole core feels it. It is like ice trying to bend. It cracks." The engineers whispered among themselves. They had never considered this. Their perfection was their doctrine. Every material, every energy flow, every connection was chosen for flawlessness. Imperfection was unacceptable. Elias continued. "This fracture is not just a mistake. It is inevitable because of your approach. You do not allow your structures to breathe. They cannot flex. They cannot take small impacts. You only allow balance in theory, not in reality." Varric swallowed hard. "Then how can it be fixed?" Elias turned, facing the core. "It can be fixed, but not the way you think. I need a tool." "A tool? We have all the advanced instruments, all quantum manipulators, all stabilization devices." Elias shook his head. "I need something simple, something physical. Something I can use to hit it." The engineers looked at each other in shock. Varric finally asked, "Hit it? You want to strike the core? Do you understand what you are suggesting? One wrong move, and the core will collapse instantly." Elias nodded. "But if I hit it at the right place, at the right angle, I can stop the fracture from spreading. It will redistribute the stress, not repair it, but keep it from growing. You cannot do that with your machines. Too precise, too controlled, too perfect. The chamber went silent. Alarms still rang in the distance as parts of the core trembled. Lights flickered as gravity stabilized and destabilized in uneven pulses. People in the hall clutched railings, unsure if they were about to float or fall. Finally, the leadership spoke. They debated. They argued. The risk was immense. If the human failed, the core and the entire world could be destroyed. Yet no other option remained. Every machine they had tried had failed. Every calculation led to the same conclusion. The core was breaking, and no advanced science could fix it. They turned to Elias. "Proceed," Varric said finally. Elias nodded. He adjusted the tool in his hand. It looked primitive to the aliens. A solid metallic rod with a specialized tip, designed to transfer force in a controlled strike. No quantum stabilizers, no energy amplifiers. Just one human, one tool, one chance. He walked to the central anchor. Every step made the core hum with vibration, as if aware of his presence. The fracture lines glowed faint red in the holographic projections. They ran like veins spreading through the structure. Elias studied them. He moved closer. He measured with his eyes, with his touch, with a sense of rhythm that the aliens could not understand. "Powered down the stabilizers for 3 seconds," he said. The alien engineers hesitated, then did as instructed. The hum of energy flows lowered. The core felt lighter, as if it could move for the first time in centuries. The fracture lines pulsed under its own force, threatening to jump again. Elias raised the tool. He positioned it precisely. He measured the angle, the weight, the force he would use. His hand did not shake. His eyes did not waver. This was not luck. It was calculation done through experience, intuition, and understanding of matter itself. Then he struck. The impact resonated through the chamber. The core vibrated in response. Lights flickered. Energy pulses ran up and down the rings. Every alien present held their breath. Nothing broke. Then, slowly, the fracture lines began to stabilize. They did not vanish, but they stopped spreading. The red glow dimmed. Stress sensors began to return to normal readings. Gravity across the world, which had been flickering dangerously, began to settle. The aliens stared in disbelief. Machines, calculations, theories, all had failed. One human with a simple strike had changed the fate of their world. Elias stepped back. He touched the core once more, feeling the energy flow stabilize under his hand. "It is not fixed," he said, "but it will survive. For now." Varric stepped forward. "Explain." "How?" "Perfection breaks. It cannot bend. It cannot absorb impact. It can only fail in one place, and then the failure spreads. My strike did not repair the fracture. It shifted the stress. It gave the structure room to survive. You need flaws. You need flexibility. That is how things endure." The engineers were silent. Some shook their heads, refusing to believe it. Some took notes furiously. None of their calculations had ever accounted for such a simple principle. Lyra spoke quietly, almost to herself. "So all our work, all these instruments, we were missing the simplest thing?" Elias nodded. "Science is knowledge. Engineering is understanding what knowledge cannot fix." Across the world, gravity stabilized further. Reports came from cities, floating habitats, and lower districts. The planet was not perfectly stable yet, but it was no longer breaking apart. People were safe. Panic subsided, replaced by cautious hope. Varric turned to Elias. "You saved our world with a single strike. How can we repay you?" Elias shook his head. "I am a mechanic. I fix machines. I will leave once the core is stable enough to hold. But your work will continue. You will need to learn to build with flexibility, not just precision." This is not a one-time fix. The aliens exchanged worried glances. Their greatest creation had survived, but it had revealed the limits of their knowledge. The doctrine they had trusted for millennia was incomplete. For the first time, the leaders of Calaris realized that survival depended not just on brilliance, but on understanding the principles that lay beyond calculation. Principles humans seemed to understand instinctively. Elias stayed near the core for a while, watching the energy flows. He made small adjustments, touching conduits here, applying minimal pressure there. Each movement was precise but simple. The core responded, almost as if it recognized a hand that understood it not through theory, but through experience. He noticed other small fractures, minor stress points, areas that had not yet failed but could under certain conditions. He noted them down, making suggestions that the engineers could follow to prevent the next collapse. They scribbled furiously, struggling to keep up with a mind that worked differently than any they had trained to follow. Hours passed. The core thrummed steadily. Gravity across Calaris returned to normal levels. People stopped panicking. And still, the human engineer worked quietly, checking, observing, guiding without ceremony. Finally, he stepped back. His task was complete for now. He turned to the alien leaders who had watched the entire process in awe. "This core will survive your next challenge, but only if you build differently," he said. "It cannot remain perfect. It needs room to bend, room to absorb, room to fail without collapsing. Otherwise it will break again." The leaders nodded, some reluctantly, some in amazement. One thing was certain. Their understanding of engineering, of creation itself, had changed forever. Elias gave one last look at the core. Then, without ceremony, he walked back toward the maintenance elevator. The aliens watched him go, realizing that this single human had done what their greatest minds could not, and for the first time they understood why humans were feared and respected across the galaxy. Not for perfection, but for their ability to survive and adapt in ways that machines and calculations could never achieve. The core hummed softly, almost peacefully, after Elias's first intervention. But the engineers and leaders of Calaris knew it was only temporary. The fracture had halted, yet the planet's survival remained fragile. Gravity was uneven in distant districts. Some floating cities still leaned dangerously. The core was stable now, but it could fail again if stress built in the wrong place. Elias studied the projections. He had observed the core's behavior, its responses to previous interventions, and its subtle vibrations. To him, it was like watching a storm that could be calmed with a single precise action. The aliens could not see it that way. They tried to overlay simulations, quantum models, and calculations. Every method predicted collapse if a strike were attempted again. Yet Elias knew the core could take it. It had survived because it needed a moment of human intuition. The alien leaders debated. One of them said, "We cannot allow him to touch the core again. The risk is beyond acceptable. One mistake, and the world is lost." Varric replied, "If we do nothing, we also risk losing everything. He saved us once. Perhaps he can do it again." Lyra watched Elias, her eyes wide with uncertainty. He walked slowly to the central anchor once more. His steps were steady, his gaze fixed, his hands ready to act. He did not carry additional devices, no instruments, no energy tools. Just a single metallic rod, simple but precise, the way humans relied on fundamentals rather than theory. Elias turned to the engineers. "I need you to shut down all stabilizers again, exactly for 3 seconds. Timing is everything." The engineers exchanged nervous glances. One trembled and said, 3 seconds. It could collapse in 1 second. Elias's expression remained calm. "Trust me. 1 strike. 1 chance." The core vibrated as stabilizers were powered down. Lights flickered, energy hums changed frequency. Gravity in the chamber shifted slightly, making the aliens uneasy. Every person in the hall braced for disaster. The hum of the core pulsed like a heartbeat, synchronized with the faint tremors in the walls. Elias studied the fracture line. He traced it with his eyes, following its rhythm. He measured angles with intuition, feeling the vibration through the floor and through the air. Then he positioned the rod. He raised it slowly. The chamber went silent. Alarms were muted, lights steady, but the core itself seemed to hold its breath. And then he struck. The impact reverberated through the chamber, a deep resonance that shook the walls and the floor. The core pulsed spinning rings vibrating in response. The aliens were thrown back slightly by the sheer energy of the strike. Sensors screamed warnings, displays flashed red and yellow. For a moment it seemed that the strike had failed. The fracture lines glowed brighter. Stress readings spiked. Gravity wavered. Panic rose in the engineers. But slowly, steadily, the core began to settle. The red glow along the fractures dimmed. The pulse of energy became even. Vibrations normalized. Gravity fluctuations lessened. It was working. Elias stepped back, observing. The fracture lines remained visible but no longer spread. Stress was redistributed. The core had survived the strike, stabilized by a principle the aliens had never considered. The engineers stared, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Machines, calculations, centuries of knowledge, all had failed to produce this result. One human, with one simple tool, had saved their world. Varric stepped forward, speechless for a moment. How did you do it?" Elias touched the surface gently. "The core is too rigid, too perfect. Perfection cannot absorb impact. Fracture forms and spreads uncontrollably. My strike did not fix it. It shifted the stress. It allowed the core to survive. It gave it space to breathe. The engineers whispered among themselves. Lyra spoke, a voice barely above a murmur. So all our calculations, all our instruments, could not do what one person did by touch? Elias nodded. Exactly. Knowledge is power, but understanding is survival. The core thrummed gently now, its energy flows stable. Gravity normalized in distant districts as reports came in from the planet. Floating habitats aligned, transport lanes stabilized, and panic began to fade. The world was not perfectly safe, but it was alive, and the people had hope again. Elias walked through the chamber, checking small sections, noting minor fractures and stress points. He made adjustments, simple but precise, giving the alien engineers instructions to prevent future collapses. They struggled to keep up, taking notes frantically. Their perception of engineering and construction had changed forever. Hours passed. The core's hum became a constant rhythm, reassuring and steady. The humans' work was almost complete. Gravity returned to normal across Caleres. Citizens resumed activity, though with cautious eyes toward the skies and floating cities. Elias finally stepped back. He faced the leaders, calm and collected. This core will survive now, but only if you rebuild with a different mindset. You must design for flexibility, not just precision. Otherwise, the next disturbance could destroy everything. The alien leaders absorbed the words. Their greatest creation had survived, but it had exposed the limits of their knowledge. Their belief in perfection as an ideal had been shattered by one human with experience, intuition, and courage.
Varric approached him. You saved our world.
How can we repay you? Elias shook his head. I am a mechanic. I fix what is broken. I will leave once the core is stable enough to hold. Your people will need to learn to design differently. This is not a one-time fix. The leaders nodded. They understood that their civilization had changed in ways they could not yet fully measure. The knowledge humans carried, knowledge beyond perfection, knowledge of survival, was something new, something that would alter their history. Elias gave a final glance at the core, a subtle smile crossing his face. Then he turned and walked toward the maintenance elevator. The alien engineers and leaders watched silently, realizing that this one human had done what thousands of their most brilliant minds could not. And in that moment, the people of Caleres understood that survival was not only about brilliance and theory. It was about adaptability, intuition, and the courage to act when perfection fails. Humanity had shown them a way to endure in a universe that could be harsh and unpredictable, and they would never forget it. The core hummed steadily, its vibrations no longer chaotic but calm, almost alive in a way the aliens had never experienced. Gravity across Caleres stabilized, though the engineers knew the work was not truly complete. They had witnessed something remarkable, something that challenged every principle they had ever believed. Elias moved through the chamber, observing the core closely. He touched conduits, rails, and panels, feeling the flow of energy and the subtle movements of metal under pressure. He moved like someone reading a language no one else could see, interpreting patterns and vibrations that seemed invisible to the alien technology. Varric approached cautiously. Explain. Tell us why your strike worked when all our instruments, calculations, and machines failed. Elias paused, studying the senior engineer. Your core is too perfect, too precise. Every component aligned in theory, every calculation accounted for. But the world is not a perfect place. Forces act in ways your machines cannot predict. Fractures appear not because of flaws in design, but because the design has no flexibility. It cannot bend, cannot absorb impact, cannot tolerate small shifts. When a crack begins, it spreads uncontrollably. Machines can detect it, measure it, but cannot stop it without allowing motion. I did. So all our stabilizers, all our harmonics, none of them could stop it because the core could not move? Exactly. You built perfection that cannot survive imperfection. I did not fix the fracture. I did not repair it. I allowed the core to breathe. I shifted stress. I created a controlled failure path that lets the core hold together. You call it primitive, but it works, the engineers whispered among themselves. Some shook their heads, disbelieving. Others furiously recorded every detail, trying to understand a principle that seemed simple but revolutionary. Their greatest creation had survived not because of their brilliance, but because of the human understanding of survival, Elias continued. Perfection is fragile. Survival relies on adaptation. You can calculate balance, harmony, and energy flows, but you cannot calculate resilience. I can feel it, and I can act on it. Varric, stepped back, overwhelmed. You saved our world with instinct. With touch and judgment instead of machines and theory. Not instinct. Experience. Knowledge beyond calculation. You understand engineering as a science. I understand it as a living system. The difference is subtle, but it matters. The chamber remained silent except for the hum of the core. Alien engineers moved cautiously, inspecting the lines of stress that had halted. They marveled at the way the fracture had stopped spreading. The core was still perfect on paper, still aligned in every way their calculations could verify, yet it had survived where their theory said it should have failed. Lyra asked. Then what must we do now? How can we prevent this from happening again? He traced the main anchor, the rings and the conduits. You must redesign your structures to survive the unpredictable, allow for flexibility, introduce controlled tolerance. Do not try to prevent failure entirely, plan for it. Give systems the ability to absorb stress and adapt without collapsing. That is how you endure. The senior leaders absorbed the lesson. They had relied on centuries of theoretical perfection, believing their calculations were absolute. Now they realized that survival depended on understanding forces beyond prediction. Adaptation, not perfection, was the key. Across the world, reports came in. Gravity in floating cities returned to normal. Platforms that had tipped slowly righted themselves. Water in channels calmed. Citizens began to step out of shelters, looking to the sky with relief and awe. The humans' methods, once dismissed as crude, had saved a civilization. Elias walked to the maintenance platform, jotting down observations. He pointed out areas where minor fractures could develop, providing simple interventions for the alien engineers to follow. They listened, some skeptical, others frantic, to understand every word. He spoke not of complex theories, but of small adjustments, physical changes, and the need for resilience. Your core will not last forever in its current form, Elias said. But if you incorporate these changes, you will extend its life, and your people will survive the next challenge. Perfection breaks, survival bends. The alien engineers and leaders remained silent, absorbing the truth of his words. Their society, built on the foundation of absolute control, had learned humility. They had learned that the principles humans carried, intuitive engineering, practical knowledge, adaptability, were not just survival techniques, but lessons in the very nature of creation. Elias continued his inspection, moving with quiet authority. He tapped conduits here, adjusted support beams slightly there, guiding the core into stability without using complex instruments. The aliens followed, copying his every movement, trying to understand a method that had no formula, no calculation, only experience and judgment. Hours passed, and the core thrummed steadily, a living entity now supported by knowledge beyond measurement. Gravity stabilized everywhere. Citizens of Calaris moved freely once again. The initial panic that had gripped the world began to fade, replaced by cautious hope and deep respect for the human who had entered their world and seen what they could not. Finally, Elias stepped back. The core was stable for now, its energy flows steady, its fractures under control. He turned to the alien leaders, his expression calm and unassuming. The core will survive, but only if you learn to build differently. Allow for stress, allow for movement, allow for imperfection. That is the difference between surviving and collapsing. Eric and Lyra exchanged glances. They understood the weight of his words. Their civilization's most treasured creation had survived, but not in the way they had imagined. Humanity had taught them a lesson that calculations and machines never could. Elias took one last look at the core. He adjusted a small panel with his hands, feeling the pulse of energy and the rhythm of the structure. Then he turned toward the elevator that would take him back to the docking bay. The aliens watched him quietly, realizing that this single human, with one simple approach and one tool, had changed their understanding of engineering, survival, and creation itself. And in that moment, Calaris learned that resilience, adaptability, and experience could surpass perfection. Humanity's lesson was clear. Brilliance alone does not ensure survival. It is understanding, intuition, and the courage to act when perfection fails that preserves life and civilization. The core had survived, and the aliens would never see engineering the same way again. Even as Calaris began to stabilize, Elias knew the danger had not passed. He had stopped the immediate collapse of the gravity core, but subtle readings in the energy flows told him the problem was not entirely solved. The fractures were held in check, but something beyond the core had triggered the initial failure. Elias needed to find the cause before the core could fail again. He moved to a projection terminal. Alien engineers gathered around, offering data, scans, and suggestions. Elias ignored most of it. He focused on the subtle shifts in the gravitational field and the faint distortions in energy patterns. He traced them back beyond the planet, past the system, into deep space. "There's something else," he said quietly. The aliens leaned closer. "The core did not fail randomly. Something out there triggered it." Varric frowned. "You mean outside our system?" Elias nodded. "Yes, some kind of gravitational interference. Waves that match the natural frequency of your core. It's subtle. Your instruments cannot detect it until it interacts with the core itself." Lyra stepped forward. How long has it been happening?" "Not long," Elias said. "The fracture began at the central anchor. That is the point most sensitive to external vibrations. It spread because the core cannot absorb unusual forces. It is resilient inside the system, but outside influences can destabilize it." The room fell silent. Engineers and leaders whispered among themselves. Their perfect world, built to last for millennia, was vulnerable to forces they had never imagined. All their calculations had failed to account for external interference. "What kind of interference?" Varric asked. Elias studied the readings. "Something like a collapsing star remnant or an unstable mass moving through space. Humans have seen this before. Objects emitting gravitational waves that can ripple across systems. Your core is sensitive enough that even small distortions can trigger failures in critical anchors." The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. They had never considered that perfection could be affected by natural chaos. They believed their calculations could account for everything. Now they realized that nature itself could bypass their knowledge. Long-range scans were initiated. The alien engineers pushed their instruments to detect any anomaly in deep space. And then the readings appeared. A faint, shifting mass of energy moving through the outer regions of the Calaris system. It was irregular, unpredictable, and fast approaching.
Lyra gasped.
"If it reaches the inner system, it could trigger a total collapse of the core." Elias nodded. "You fixed the immediate fracture, but if this mass reaches your planet, the core will fail completely unless you redesign it to withstand external stress." Varric clenched his fists. "We thought the danger was over." "It is not," Elias said. "You cannot rely solely on internal stability. External factors matter. The universe is not static. Your core works only if you consider forces beyond your calculations. Humans call it planning for the unpredictable." The alien leaders huddled in discussion. Every choice now had stakes beyond imagination. The core's survival depended on actions they had not yet taken. Their civilization, once confident in its perfection, now faced a threat that no calculation could fully predict. Elias turned to the engineers. "We need to modify the core. Introduce controlled flexibility at all critical points. It must absorb unusual forces, not just internal stress. If you do this, it will survive the approaching anomaly. If not, the planet may not endure." The engineers hurried to work, following Elias's guidance. They altered energy conduits, adjusted supports, and introduced tolerances in places they had always considered immutable. Elias oversaw the work, explaining subtle details that the aliens had never considered. He demonstrated how a small shift, a minor flexibility, could redistribute enormous energy without causing failure. Hours passed. The anomaly approached the outer system. Sensors recorded the movement, and all eyes watched as its gravitational waves rippled through the system. Energy pulses in the core shifted subtly, testing the new adjustments. For a tense moment, it seemed the core would fail again. Elias studied the readings. He adjusted a support beam slightly, touched a conduit, and spoke instructions to the engineers. Slowly, the core absorbed the incoming waves. The fractures did not spread. Stress levels normalized. Gravity across the planet remained stable. The engineers cheered quietly, overwhelmed by relief. The leaders exchanged astonished looks. Their greatest creation had survived the first human strike, and now it had endured external chaos through human guidance. Elias stepped back, exhausted but calm. He looked at the approaching anomaly in the projection. "You see," he said, "planning for unpredictability is survival. Perfection cannot adapt. Only flexibility saves." Lyra, still catching her breath, asked, "Will it always survive now?" Elias shook his head. "No, this is temporary. You have survived this wave, but the universe will always present new challenges. The core will endure if you design it with adaptability in mind. Otherwise, next time it may not." Varric turned to the leaders. "We must learn from this. Humanity has shown us a path we cannot see on our own. The alien leaders nodded solemnly. They realized the scope of their reliance on human knowledge. One human engineer, with tools no more advanced than a rod and touch, had taught them more about survival than centuries of their own science. Elias, having completed the immediate guidance, prepared to leave. He turned to the core one last time, touching a rail gently. The energy flow responded to him, steady and calm. Then he moved toward the elevator that would take him back to the docking bay. The aliens watched, realizing that their civilization had changed forever. Across Calaris, citizens were returning to life. Floating habitats aligned, transport systems normalized, and the world breathed again. But deep within the hearts of the alien engineers and leaders, a new understanding had taken root. Survival was not guaranteed by perfection. It was earned through adaptability, insight, and the courage to act when no calculation could provide certainty. And humanity, with its simple tools and profound intuition, had delivered that lesson in the most dramatic way imaginable. The gravity core thrummed steadily, its vibrations calm, as the alien engineers implemented every adjustment Elias had suggested. The immediate danger had passed, but the lesson was far from over. The approaching anomaly had tested the core, and it had endured, but only because the system had been given flexibility. The alien leaders understood, at last, that survival demanded more than perfection. It demanded foresight, adaptability, and the willingness to act when theory failed. Elias walked through the core chamber one last time. His hands moved over conduits, rails, and panels, making minor adjustments, ensuring the core was as stable as it could be for the present. The engineers watched him work, still astonished. They had seen the core nearly destroyed, watched it saved by one human, and now they realized that their entire approach to engineering was incomplete. Human methods, simple but effective, had proven themselves superior in practice, if not in theory. Varric approached, voice quiet. "You have changed the way we understand everything. Your presence, your methods, they are unlike anything we have known." Elias nodded. "This is how humans survive. We build systems to endure mistakes, failures, and unexpected forces. Perfection breaks. Survival bends." The alien engineers nodded, taking notes, recording every detail. They began redesigning portions of the core, introducing controlled tolerances, adjusting support structures, and allowing minor movements that would absorb unexpected stresses. This was not theory. It was practical engineering guided by human experience. Every adjustment reflected Elias's philosophy: resilience over perfection. Meanwhile, long-range scans of the outer system confirmed that the anomaly had passed. Its gravitational waves rippled across space but did not destabilize the core again. Calaris was safe, for now. Citizens moved freely in floating cities, transport systems normalized, and panic subsided. The planet had endured, and the people were beginning to understand why humans were revered across the galaxy for their engineering and survival skills. Elias prepared to leave. He had completed his mission, stabilizing the core, teaching the aliens the principles of adaptability and ensuring they could survive the external forces that would inevitably return. As he walked toward the maintenance elevator, the alien leaders stopped him. "Stay," one said. "We wish to learn more. Your knowledge, your intuition, it is extraordinary." Elias shook his head. "I am an engineer. I fix what is broken. My purpose here is complete. Your people can continue the work. You have the knowledge now. It is up to you to apply it." He paused, looking at the towering core one last time. The energy flows were steady, the fractures contained, and the world stable. Yet he knew the universe would always present new challenges. The core would survive future disturbances only if the principles he had taught were applied diligently, otherwise it would fail. "You must remember," he said quietly, "perfection is fragile. Endurance requires bending, not breaking." Humanity's lesson was clear. Survival depended on adaptability, on practical knowledge, and on courage in the face of uncertainty. Elias returned to his ship, boarding without ceremony. The docking sequence completed and the vessel disengaged from Calaris' interior. As it exited the system, the alien leaders observed, aware that their civilization had been forever altered by the actions of a single human. Across Calaris, reports came in from various districts. Gravity stabilized in previously vulnerable areas, floating platforms aligned perfectly, and transportation resumed. Citizens returned to their lives, but the memory of the crisis remained. They spoke of the human who had entered their core chamber, who had seen what they could not, and who had saved their world with experience, intuition, and courage. The alien scientists began a program of redesign, introducing flexible supports and stress tolerances into all major structures. Their engineering philosophy shifted from one of absolute perfection to one that embraced resilience. Human principles became a guiding influence across the planet. The core was no longer just a marvel of technology. It was a testament to adaptability, a living example of survival in the face of impossible odds. Long after Elias had departed, he observed other anomalies from distant systems, noting how similar crises might be approached. The human philosophy of practical engineering, of bending rather than breaking, had spread across Caloris. The aliens began to reach out to other civilizations seeking human guidance for their own engineering dilemmas, and slowly humanity's reputation as unparalleled problem solvers in the galaxy grew. The final lesson lingered in the halls of Calaris. Knowledge alone does not guarantee survival. Experience, intuition, and the courage to act when systems fail are the keys to enduring the universe's unpredictable forces. And humanity, with its simple tools and extraordinary insight, had become the standard by which other species measured resilience and ingenuity. Elias's ship disappeared into deep space, leaving behind a civilization forever changed. The gravity core continued to hum, stable and strong, a monument not only to alien engineering but to the lessons humanity had imparted. Calaris would face many challenges in the future, but they now understood that survival was not about flawless calculation. It was about adaptability, foresight, and the human way of enduring against all odds. And somewhere in the galaxy, across countless systems, other species would soon learn the same truth. When perfection fails, it is humanity that saves the day.